When this happened, I lived in a small apartment near the college I went to. I had graduated the year before, but I stayed there while I was looking for a better job. There wasn't a lot of work in my field of study, so I was willing to move pretty much anywhere in the country for the right opportunity. Because of that, I wasn't really interested in dating at the time. There was no point in starting something and then just having to move away. I had spent some time on dating apps previously, but nothing worked out. I dated one guy for a while. His name was Dan. He was older than me. I was 22 and he was 28. We met on a dating app, and when we broke up, I didn't use any of the apps again. The reason things didn't work out was that Dan was way too clingy and needy. Normally I'm the one who needs more attention, but this guy took it to another level. We would need to be in constant contact, and I would even need to check in with him before going out with friends, or even with my family. After about 2 months of that, I'd had enough and broke things off. I ended things at a coffee shop in our town, hoping that the public place would be best, but he made a real scene in front of everyone anyway. My apartment was on the ground floor of a house that was split up into 3 different units. All of my neighbors entered through the front door, then there was my front door on the inside. The stairs went up to my neighbor's door, and then there was one apartment in the basement as well. The main front door was never locked, because we all had our own doors on the inside with heavy locks. Anybody could just walk right into the front foyer of our house. One night, it was raining, and I was sitting in my living room surfing the web on my laptop when I heard a knock on the front door. Not my interior door, just the main outside door that we all used. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I thought it was one of my neighbors. I wasn't sure why they wouldn't just come in and knock on the right door though, but I didn't care anyway. After another minute, I heard the knock again. This time it was on my front window. I got up and walked over to it, then I opened the curtains. There was nobody there that I could see, and nobody running away either. It was creepy, but I thought it was just someone messing around. Kids playing a prank maybe. I locked the window, double-checked the door, and then went to bed. The next night, I had just finished dinner, and I was sitting at my small kitchen table, finishing a glass of wine with my friend Beth. All of a sudden, there was a knock on my door. This time it was the interior door to my place, not the main outside one like before. I was expecting another friend that night. We were going to watch a movie together, the 3 of us. She was a little early, but I figured it was her. When I went to answer the door, there was nobody there. I looked out my front window and saw a man walking away from my house. I was pretty sure it was the one who knocked. I was worried, because I knew for sure that it wasn't kids messing around. Maybe he was the one who knocked on my window as well. Even though he didn't really do anything yet, I was beyond creeped out. My other friend did eventually come over, and the 3 of us spent the evening in my living room watching a movie. When it was over, we talked for a while. At around midnight, both of my friends had to go, so I was alone. I wanted them to stay, but they couldn't. I went to bed soon after they left. Sometime in the middle of the night, a noise woke me up. I wasn't sure what it was at first, because it happened while I was still asleep. I lay in bed for a moment listening, then I heard it again. It was just a subtle creaking noise, not uncommon in my place, especially with other people living in the house. Things like that happened all the time, but they weren't usually loud enough to wake me up. I was curious enough to check it out. I got out of bed and walked towards my bedroom door. I opened it a crack and peeked out. There, standing in the middle of my living room, was a man, and I recognized him. It was that guy Dan who I had dated about a year prior. We hadn't talked or seen each other since. We just stared at each other, both frozen. I wanted to run to my phone and call the cops, but I was too scared to move. I thought if I did, then he would do something. He seemed quite calm at first, and he wasn't even startled when he saw me. I don't know if that makes it more or less creepy. After an incredibly uncomfortable silence, Dan told me to come out. He said that he just wanted to talk. I was still standing in the doorway of my room. My phone was next to my bed, and I knew that if I left the room, I would be at his mercy. In a split second, I made my decision. I retreated into my room and shut the door, holding it closed. There wasn't even a lock, but I managed to pull my bed in front of it and wedge it in place. It actually felt pretty secure. All the while, I could hear Dan banging on the door and yanking on the doorknob. I jumped over to my phone and called the cops. The door was weak, and I knew it wouldn't hold forever, I told the cops my address and screamed that it was an emergency. They told me that somebody was already in the area, so it would be less than 5 minutes. That was good news, but I didn't even know if I had that much time. I shouted out to Dan that the cops were coming, so he better go before they got there. When I said that, the banging stopped. He began pleading with me to call them off. It was like he was surprised that I even called in the first place. The guy broke into my apartment, tried kicking down my door, but he couldn't understand why I called the cops. We talked through the door for the next minute, and when the cops arrived, he was arrested. They were just in time, because another good kick would have broken a hole right through my door, Shining style. I told the police that I knew him, and that we dated previously. I also told them about the strange noises leading up to that night. With that information, they thought I might be a victim of stalking. I still don't know the extent of the stalking, because I moved away a few weeks later to live with my parents. They were over 5 hours away, and it's not nearly far enough. A few years ago, I was working as a security guard at a parking lot. It was right downtown. During the day, we would be full of people working in the city. At night, it would pick up again with people out on the town. I worked the late evening shift. It started at 4:30 p.m. and went until 1 a.m. So I would catch the end of rush hour, then I would be there for the party scene as well. One good thing about that place was that it was covered with cameras. Since I was alone for most of the night, it was a plus that I could keep an eye on everything easily. There was a small building on one of the corners of the lot, and that's where I would be for most of the night. There was a desk in the front of it with 2 computer monitors that showed the feed from the cameras. Each of them was split into 4, so I guess there were 8 cameras in total. My shift felt long, and I would spend most of my time playing games on my phone or reading a book. There was no requirement that I had to patrol the area, but I would do it anyway, just to stretch my legs. I'd say that I would probably walk around 10 or 15 laps around the whole thing every shift. There were several regular customers of the parking lot. I didn't talk to any of them because our payment system was fully automated. I did come to recognize several people though. This story is about a young woman who used to park at our lot almost every day. At around 6:30, she would pull into the lot and park her car, then walk down the sidewalk away from where my office was. I think she was working nights downtown, so it was almost every single night that this pattern would repeat. She would sometimes come back at around midnight and drive off, but sometimes I would be off before she came back. One night at around 6:30, it was a Friday or Saturday, I was at my desk watching the camera feeds. I noticed a single man standing on the sidewalk next to the parking lot. He caught my attention because he was pacing back and forth in a nervous, jittery way. Otherwise, I wouldn't have noticed him. His hands were in his pockets, but I couldn't see his face because he was turned away from the camera. Just then, the woman's car pulled in. She got out and headed down the sidewalk. Just as she was leaving, the man started walking in the same direction, staying a fair distance behind. I was alarmed, but not sure if I was overreacting. I followed the 2 of them on the cameras for as long as I could, but eventually they were out of view. I thought about it for the rest of the night, and by the end of my shift, I had convinced myself that it was nothing. There were a lot of people around there, and 2 people walking in the same direction is not a crime. I thought it looked sinister, but when I thought about explaining it to the cops, I realized that I was going to come off as the crazy one. When my shift was over, I took off and went home. The next night, I was working again. It was a Saturday night, and as soon as I got there, it was really busy. The parking lot was absolutely packed. Not a single spot was free. Since we didn't do reserved spots, that meant that no new cars could come in until one left. Because of that, this was one of the rare nights when the woman did not park with us. She must have had to find another spot since we were full. At 6:30, I was staring at the computer screens again. That's when I noticed that same fidgety man from before. He was standing in the exact same spot, pacing back and forth, just like last night. I watched him for a few minutes and then went back to my phone. After about 15 minutes, I looked up at the screen again and the man was still there, still in the same spot. I then decided to go for a walk around the lot, just to stretch my legs. When I got to the corner where the man was standing, I finally got a good look at him. He was around 35 years old, with a thick build, and he was about 5'8", give or take. He had a gray jacket and gray sweatpants, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. I made eye contact with him for a split second, but he looked away quickly and continued to pace in that spot. I went back to my office, feeling creeped. I watched him on and off for the next hour. He hardly moved from that spot on the corner. Eventually, I looked at the screen again, and he was finally gone, but I didn't see which direction he went. I had the next 2 days off from work, so the next night that I was there was Tuesday. I got there at 4:30 as usual and settled into the desk. I had a coffee and I was reading something on my phone. It wasn't busy that night. We were at around 1/3 capacity, if that. Again at around 6:30, I saw that same man standing in the same spot. Then a car pulled into the lot. It was that same young woman. She got out and headed down the street as usual. And again, the man seemed to follow her. By then I was getting concerned. I was pretty sure he was stalking her, and I had no idea how long it had been going on. As I sat there, I didn't know what to do. I still didn't feel that there was enough to call the cops, but I had to do something. Later in the night when I was leaving, one of the other guards, Raoul, came in to take my spot. I filled him in on what was happening and told him to keep an eye on the woman's car to make sure she was safe. He told me he would try. This pattern went on for the next few nights, and with each day, I was getting more and more worried. I did call the cops for advice, but when I told them what I was seeing, they told me there was nothing they could do. They were concerned and seemed to take it seriously, but with the evidence I had, there was no way they could make an arrest. They told me to continue to watch, and that hopefully it was nothing. However, one night, things reached another level. It was a quiet weeknight, and the same thing happened early on in my shift. The creepy man was standing there on the sidewalk and followed the woman when she left her car. I was getting really concerned by then. It was the 7th or 8th time I had noticed. Later in the night at around midnight, I was watching the screens again, and I saw the man walk into frame. This time he strolled right into the parking lot, even though I'm pretty sure he didn't park there. I looked away for less than a minute, and then when I looked back, he was gone. That was not nearly enough time for him to get away, so I was confused. I knew he must still be there somewhere, but I couldn't find him. Something wasn't right, so I got up and decided to walk around the parking lot to make sure the man was truly gone. After a few minutes, the woman's car came into sight. From my angle, I could just barely see a man crouched down behind it. He didn't seem to notice me. Right then, I called the cops. They were there in less than 2 minutes and apprehended the man. I filled them in on the whole story to give them context. When they searched him, they found a gun, a large knife, and a roll of duct tape in his backpack. That's the end of it as far as I know. The man was arrested for stalking, but this could be the tip of the iceberg. I don't know if it ended there, but I never saw the man again. Maybe he gave up, or maybe he just got more clever. Like I said, the parking lot was wired up with cameras. He may have learned to avoid places like that. I used some of the main dating apps when I was a student. I had met a few girls in real life before, but it was always hard for me to get a date. I have an awkward and shy personality, but I'm tall and handsome, so dating apps worked really well for me. By the time they find out that I have a crap personality, they're already somewhat invested. It's a lot easier than meeting in person, because in person, they can tell that I'm weird right away. One day I was swiping through Bumble. For those who don't know, that's the one where the girl has to message first. I matched with someone named Ashley. She had only 2 pictures. One of them was from behind, but the one that showed her face confirmed that she was beautiful. Her profile said that she went to my school, but I didn't recognize her. I was in my last year, and I wouldn't know too many people who were younger or not in my program, so that wasn't alarming. She actually sent me a message within seconds of our match. I was happy she did. Within 5 or 6 messages, we had agreed to meet in real life. There was a bar near our school that I would go to sometimes. Not a campus pub, but a place where a lot of students would go. I got there early and sat at a table, then ordered a drink. We never exchanged numbers for safety reasons, so we were still communicating through the app. I pulled out my phone to check my messages and didn't have any new ones from her. It was still early, so I just waited. While I was sitting there, I noticed a man at the bar who kept looking at me. I just tried to ignore him. After another 10 minutes, it was past the time when Ashley was supposed to show. She was a few minutes late at that point, so no big deal. I did check my messages again though, and this time when I opened the app, I saw that we were unmatched. She had stood me up. I was hurt and disappointed. It was the first time anyone had ever done something like that to me. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed that man at the bar staring back at me again. He creeped me out for some reason, but I didn't know why. I found the server, paid my bill, and then went to the bathroom. When I was finally leaving, I noticed the man at the bar was already gone. I walked back to my house and told my roommates what happened. They laughed at me, like any good friends would. Then we played some video games. After about an hour, we heard a loud bang at the front window of the house. It could have been caused by a closed fist, or maybe a tennis ball. I walked over and pulled back the curtains. It wasn't broken, but when I looked out, I saw a man standing on the sidewalk, facing my house. I couldn't tell if he was looking at me, because it was too dark. It seemed pretty obvious that he was responsible for whatever hit our window, though. Against my better judgment, I walked out the front door to confront the man. I wasn't angry or anything, and I wasn't looking for a fight. Naively, I thought it was a misunderstanding of some kind. Maybe he was another student trying to mess with a friend, and he got the wrong house. That's what I was thinking anyway. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, then walked towards the sidewalk where the guy was standing. As soon as I got close, I recognized him as the man who was at the bar when I was waiting. He looked up at me and smiled, then I turned away and went back inside. My roommate and I discussed it for about an hour. I told him the man was in the bar looking at me while I was waiting, and that was when Ashley unmatched me. We both thought it was weird, and that he was probably behind the Ashley profile. It was a sick joke, but neither of us thought it was much more than that. Over the next week, I would see the guy around a lot. One time I was walking down the sidewalk, and I saw him standing there. It was a busy day, so I was not that worried. I kept my eyes pointed straight ahead, but I could tell that he was looking at me. When I walked past him, he leaned over and whispered, "F your mother," at me. I just kept walking. About 2 or 3 blocks away, I saw him again on the sidewalk ahead of me. I had walked past him before, so that meant he must have run ahead on one of the side roads in order to get in front of me again. When I passed him again, he said something else rude to me, but I can't remember what. Things like that kept happening for another couple of weeks. One of my roommates wanted to call the cops, but I thought we should just ignore him. I thought he was trying to get a reaction out of me, and the best way to deal with it was to not give him anything. In the end, the stalking did seem to stop. We still don't know exactly what he was trying to do, but he was definitely a weird guy. Luckily, things never got violent, but there's no telling exactly what he was capable of. At the time when this happened, I was about 20 years old, male, and in college. Personally, I've always been a weird type of person, and I'm not to be messed around with more than anything. In around January, I had this friend who I had recently met, and I'll call her Miranda. Miranda, while walking down the hallway with me and another friend who I'll call Jake, had accidentally bumped into this rather tall guy. I myself am 6'3", while this guy was around 6'5". Miranda was shorter, at around 5'4". Jake was short, but African American, and fit. He looked like he could whoop some ass. I'm decently built, like an old-style wrestler from the late 1800s or early 1900s. This guy was tall, with curly brownish hair, but I don't quite remember his eye color. After she bumped into him, he turned around and said,
"You know, that bump was pretty hot. I bet your hair would smell really nice going down my drain at night."
She was creeped out, and like most of my friends, she was pretty awkward and easy to scare, so she ran off. Jake then stepped up to the guy and said, "I'll whoop your ass if you ever talk to her like that again." I was standing there thinking that the guy was pathetic. He looked down at Jake with a kind of stare, like he thought he was superior.
"I'll eat you like a bowl of cornflakes,"
the tall guy said. I held Jake back, because it was clear that he was ready to fight him. I looked at the guy with a blank stare, and said, "You know, those cornflakes would be mighty fine with all 4 of your limbs chopped off for soup. Want to step into my dungeon?" This weirdly shocked the tall guy, and we did end up learning his name from another woman, so we'll just call him James. For the next few days, he was asking my friends about Miranda. Just normal questions, but being visibly creepy while doing so. Later, me and Miranda were hanging out in her room. It was light out, and we heard a knock at the door. She went to look through the peephole that some of the college dorm rooms have. It was that guy standing there, and there was a sign that he was turned on in the lower region of his body. Freaking out, she froze up. I noticed this and walked over to look through the peephole. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty weird, but not stupid, so I usually carry a knife on me, either in my pocket or if I need to hide it better, strapped to my body. I can be pretty paranoid. I pulled it out, then opened the door quickly, as I had my friend go to her bathroom. The guy said,
"Oh, it's just you."
I licked my lips, holding out my knife and looking at him. "Leave, or I'm gonna cut you and drain your blood." He looked alarmed at this and ran off. I can't say for sure, but I thought he had a rag in his hands behind him, so I'm assuming he had bad intentions. I talked to my friend after, and we reported him. Actually, she did, because that part about me having a knife in the dorms would not have gone over so well. I ended up staying for another term of college, with decent scores in my courses. The dude had left my friend alone for about 2 months. The last time he tried anything, my friend Miranda was walking with Jake, as well as another friend, who was just as tall as the creepy guy. He was pretty skinny, with a six-pack. I'll call him John. The creepy guy stepped out from around a corner and tried to grab Miranda by the arm. What happened next is what I expected. I don't know exactly who did it, but it was either Jake or John. One of them got the guy to the ground and stomped him out pretty bad. The guy was brought to the hospital and charges were filed. About a month later, I ended up leaving half a term early. I came back a few weeks later for graduation and found out that the guy had been let out of police custody. Since the college wasn't the greatest, they didn't have camera proof of him doing any of this. I'm 22 now, going on 23, and my friends have graduated from their courses too. Every now and then, my friend Miranda thanks me for protecting her from that guy. To start, I'll tell you that I'm a female, and while I was attending college, I had the unfortunate luck of acquiring stalkers faster than a petri dish develops new strains of bacteria. I don't consider myself to be the prettiest or most popular. I'm actually quite plain and boring. Not into the partying scene or getting guys' numbers, and to be perfectly honest, I can be pretty dense when a guy makes advances towards me. I was at work like any ordinary day. I worked in a huge chain department store in customer service. A guy caught my eye, not because I thought he was attractive, far from it, but because he wouldn't stop leering at me. He hopped lines to get into my queue and waited until it was his turn to approach the counter. He was making a small return and asked me if I had a boyfriend out of the blue. That caught me off guard. I was attending college in a town where I had no intention of staying, simply because I'm not fond of city dwelling. I was raised in a no-stoplight town, where fun on a Friday or Saturday night consisted of sitting in the local bank's parking lot. That, or horsing around until the town curfew. Yes, my hometown has a curfew. You know how sometimes you get a weird sensation in the back of your mind, or the pit of your stomach, and you know something bad is going to happen? That's what happened when this guy reached my workstation. So to err on the side of caution, I told him I had a fiancé back home, even though that was a bold-faced lie. I was very much a single gal at the time, and still am. He asked where my engagement ring was, and I told him it was getting sized. He then asked if I wanted to have a little fun. Mind you, I didn't know this guy. Then he asked me if I had ever been with a girl intimately. I was shocked. What business is it of his if I've ever been intimate with another female? After the guy invaded my space and asked me increasingly personal questions, I managed to get him to move along so I could continue helping customers. This went on every day, sometimes even 2 or 3 times a day, for about 2 months. The guy would come in and hound me every single day, and as if that wasn't enough, he got a job at the store and kept approaching me even when I was on the clock. It got to the point where I was growing fearful of his presence, because he couldn't take no for an answer. I tried not to let him see what kind of car I drove at the time, but I know he saw me at least once or twice. Eventually, my stalker gave me his number and asked me if I would go out with him. I reported him to my supervisor, and unfortunately, I was told that they couldn't fire him simply because he was harassing me. I never revealed where I lived to him, but I saw him a few times parked just 2 or 3 houses down from where I lived. I lived off campus in a townhouse with my elder brother and his fiancée. Needless to say, I no longer live in that area and no longer work at that establishment, but I always worry that he's going to show up at my new job, even though I'm approximately 2.5 to 3 hours away.